Hello, world, and welcome to Choices, Books, and Gifts, where you always have choices. I am so happy today to present our guest, who is Vivace Max Victor. Now, she
Where'd
is
you
an old
go?
friend of mine. She comes into the store. We're friends. We've chatted. I've gone to a few of her interviews, not her interviews, what do they call them, Vivace? When I go to listen to you speak, her engagements. All right. So, with that, I want to read a little bio on Vivace and then get into it. I am delighted to introduce my next guest. You know, it's Vivace Max Victor, an industrial leading life coach who has been featured on the series $1 Million Listings and Buying Beverly Hills. She is also a featured guest on Fox Business News, Fox Live, Fox Nation, Newsmax, Law and Crime TV, and Court TV. Vivace has a bachelor's and a master's degree in biology. She graduated from Cornell Medical School as a surgical physician's assistant. But 12 years ago, she left her career in medicine to become a life coach and now coaches some of the top real estate agents in the country, as well as clients in the fields of technology, finance, law, and medicine. That's quite a wonderful resume you have there.
Well, thank you so much. It's good to be here with you. I'm excited to talk to you and to your audience and to bring some love and power into their lives.
Well, I know you, if anyone, can create that. So I'm going to jump right in. But before I jump right in, I'm going to say Vivace made a wonderful film. She calls it her coming out film. And it's riveting. It's exciting. It's sad. It's happy. I can only say this. You guys have to watch this film. It's just 30 minutes and it's just amazing. So this will be matched up on our website. We will put it on our website. And otherwise, where else can they find it, dear?
Well, the video is on YouTube. It says Vivace My Story. It's also on my website, which is fierceselfconfidence.com.
Excellent. So, like I said, go and see this. It's just amazing. So, my first question: what was the reason? Oh, and to just tell that the audience know, a lot of these questions you may think are far out, but they're asked because of the video. So this is a series, and this particular podcast is based on this video. So, what was the reason for them, your family, your brothers especially, to beat you? What was your dad's thinking around that?
So Jay, just to give a little context, Jay is referring to my coming out video, which is on YouTube. So on this YouTube video, I explain my life, how I went from having PTSD and being suicidal and how I got to the other side. So in it, I share my family of origin story, which was extremely challenging for me to do, and especially to do it in a public domain. I'm Iranian. I was born and raised in Iran, so it is not part of our culture to share the intricacies of our family of origin, especially when they include incredibly bad behavior and a lot of violence and a lot of absurd rituals and torture and trauma. And so I created this video. Listen, my father had programmed my brothers to have this horrible behavior, and he would reward them for this behavior. So they were just programmed by him.
So that was just the norm where you grew up.
It's
That
not
was
the
the
norm
norm.
where I grew up. It was a norm in our household. We were probably a very insane household in a normal environment. I'm sure your audience member can definitely relate to that. So we looked normal on the outside. My father was educated and he was dignified and he was wealthy. So everything on the outside was great, except the home was extremely abusive and very, very chaotic. So he had two different personalities. There was a personality that he would present that was very dignified to the external world. And then he would become this psychotic human when nobody was watching. So he had all sorts of unacceptable behaviors that he shared very openly and all the time with us, unfortunately.
Understood. So what was that like for you watching the violence against you, your mom, What?
I was terrorized and terrified every moment of every day. When you're in an environment where you're constantly being beaten, or the person that you love is constantly being beaten, and you're being mentally and emotionally manipulated, and you have all the worst things said to you constantly, there's a constant hypervigilance and agitation of like, when is the other shoe going to drop? So
No.
it was extremely chaotic. I never knew when I would be safe, and I didn't know if I were safe, if my mother would be safe. And if we were physically safe and if we were physically unharmed, then there was always a constant and predictable emotional abuse. So it was very challenging to grow up, and we didn't have access to therapy. We actually were not allowed to see my mom's relatives, and my dad didn't really socialize, so we were very ostracized from normal human beings outside of going to school. It was very, very challenging. So it's not like you had a coping mechanism where you had a therapist or an advisor or someone else to talk to. This was like the family secret, and you just didn't talk about it, and you pretended you came from a dignified family.
It's amazing because I grew up in an Italian family, and I had not some of that, honestly, but I can't even imagine what life must be like that, just constantly walking on eggshells. So, once again, that's just an amazing thing. Um,
Well, it wasn't just
why is
that also, Jay, because it was the abuse within the household, but also Iran went through the Iran-Iraq war. So suddenly our schools became segregated. And suddenly there was tremendous amounts of violence in the streets and bombs going off and things breaking. And so at first it was the household, but then also the surrounding the Islamic regime when they took over. Then there was chaos and madness, like literally outside our home. We had people standing outside of our front door with machine guns pointed. And so there was no sense of safety anywhere. But it's interesting, I felt less threatened by the Islamic regime that was murdering people than I did by my dad. I was actually more terrorized by my dad. I felt it was safer in the streets, even though the
that's
streets were insane.
I mean, I can't imagine that war at home and war in the streets, and you became who you became, because I know you and you are truly a wonderful person. Why is it important to you? And you mentioned this in your video. So, like I said, we're jumping around a little bit.
Mm.
That you don't really want any sort of dependency on men.
Well, my mom was financially dependent on my dad's income, although she was actually a dental hygienist and he was a dentist. So she worked for him. So theoretically, like a normal person would have, she should have gotten paid. She worked for him for 15 years. He never paid her. So he had total financial control. So he had dominion over us in many different ways because of the lack of financial power that my mom had. So my greatest um, coping mechanism slash survival technique was, let me get a job so that no man can control me, so I will never go through what my mom went through or what I went through as a child.
That is perfectly understandable, and I get it. Believe me, I do get it. And you mentioned it already that your father had some wealth and all that. And my next question was going to be, what does your father do for work? But he was a dentist, and a
Yeah.
successful dentist.
Very successful. I mean, he was booked out for months ahead of time. I'm telling you, he had two different personalities. I'm sure a lot of your audience can relate, where someone looks totally normal in one environment, but then you've seen them in an alternate environment and they're a completely different human being with totally different characteristics, demeanor, values, everything. It's like living in the Twilight Zone.
I perfectly understand it. I've seen it in my family as well. I'm just curious because of the way your family treated you and whatnot. Do you still talk with your brother's father and mother? Is there any relationship there at all?
So, thankfully, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but thankfully my father died. So I'm very excited about that. And for anyone who's had an abusive parent, it's almost a relief, at least for me it is, that he doesn't exist, because not only was he torturing us, he was torturing other people. So I feel like the world is a better place. So that gives me some level of peace. With my brothers, we text. It's hard. We don't have a relationship. We can't relate. We're extremely different. My one brother acts like nothing ever happened in our family that was bad. And so he presents to me a very artificial, yeah, an artificial reality to the masses. And so he never talks about it. So if you were to talk to him, you would think he came from the best family ever. My middle brother gets over fixated on the minutia. He's a little bit, and he's extremely smart. He's a little bit like Rain Man, but he'll pick on little things, and so it's hard to have a conversation with him because he will say, 20 years ago on that date, this happened, and he'll just go around and around in circles. So it's challenging to have a conversation with him. I mean, I've told him, I will have a conversation with you if we don't talk about the past. But then that conversation never happens because he just defaults to the past. In the past, it's very painful and it's overwhelming, and we're going to go around in circles. And so it doesn't allow me to feel excited to communicate with him, although I love him. And so with my mom, there were a couple of stints of a couple of years where we didn't speak because of all the trauma and the abuse. And we were both handling it in that way. When I posted that, after I posted that video, when I wanted to post the video, my mother was going through radiation therapy, and I knew that. And so I actually waited for her last treatment before I posted the video because I felt bad that this woman's going through cancer treatment, and now I'm going to out her on YouTube. I like that tortured me. But at the same time, I felt like I had been silent for so long that I needed to speak my truth. So I posted it, and then I posted in January, and then in February, my grandmother, who was 96, but she suddenly died. And
Wow.
so I hadn't spoken to my mom, and it was a whole story. My mom had told me that I wasn't allowed to come to my grandmother's funeral. So I was really always afraid that my grandmother would die and they would have the funeral and I wouldn't be there and I'd miss it. So I had tremendous anxiety about that. But anyways, I ended up going to the funeral, and there's a Jewish mourner's prayer that you do at the funeral site. And when they were doing that prayer moved me so much, even though I don't think I'm religious at all. Somehow those words moved me. And I went up to her and I hugged her, and literally everybody was dumbfounded. And so then she invited me to come to the lunch for the services after my grandmother's passing, which was weird because she had told me I wasn't allowed to come to the funeral. So I actually had coaching clients. I called my clients and I canceled because I went to this lunch to honor my grandmother. And so after that, she was like sending me all these like, love emojis and whatever. And I was overwhelmed because I was like, wait, we haven't spoken for a while. Where are these emojis coming from? It was overwhelming. So we went to her friend who was a social worker. And I think all your foreign listeners can relate to this. I was like, let me have my mom speak to someone who's from her own culture, who understands her language, and we can speak in Farsi. So I said, let's speak to this friend, my mom's friend, who was a social worker. They grew up together in Iran, so she understood the Iranian culture. She was also married to an American psychiatrist. I think he was a psychiatrist or some sort of therapist. And so she understood both ways of communicating, and we sat with that video. I sat with that lady and my mom. We had a 5.5-hour therapy session. It was devastating. And at some point during the session, I said to her, I said, by the way, put up this video up on YouTube. And I wanted to share the video with her. And the lady was like, no, we're not going to look at that video. And I was like, no, I want to share my mom, my thoughts. And she's like, no. And I said, well, why are you so against this video? That lady somehow had seen it. So she wanted to make sure my mother wasn't horrified by the words coming out of my mouth. So we sat together, and then my mom was like, where's this video? And my mom didn't know YouTube. So it was like, where's YouTube? And we log on to YouTube and we sit down to watch this together. And it was, again, very challenging because afterwards, her first comment was, you didn't say anything nice about me. And it was hard. I love my mom. But I said this was not like the Academy Award of I Love My Mother video. This was the truth video of what actually happened in our lives. And so after that, during those 5.5 hours, I started to learn that her trauma response was avoidance. And the things that were so painful and traumatizing for me that I wanted to have a conversation about, she would shut down. So as you saw, and I don't want to do a spoiler alert for your viewers, but as you saw, I shared about being suicidal. And till this day, my mom will never comment on that entire time when I was suicidal and I told her I was going to take my life. We still have never had a conversation about it. She just kind of skips over that little chapter. And that was a very painful chapter for me. And so posting that video was extremely, extremely hard. And my impetus in doing that was I would go to these companies and I do these presentations and people would line up and thank me. And then they would all say, you're so confident. We're not confident. And I said, well, I came from the abyss. I came from a dark hole. And so I also felt responsible that these people can't relate to me because they think I'm happy-go-lucky, confident girl. They don't realize I was devastated, desperate, suicidal girl because I never told them. And so when I posted that video, I was like, okay, here's the actual story, how I went from being devastated and suicidal and almost taking my life to getting to the other side and being so empowered that I'm empowering others. So I don't know what your original question was even, but that's my answer.
That was a good answer. And my original question, but as you say, I don't want to spoil the work, was about your mom. And once you folks out there watch the film, you'll understand why the question was asked. Now, also in your story, and spoiler and a lot, there was a great part that I absolutely loved when you sort of got your independence. It was in the middle of it, and you tell the dime story. So I'm not going to ruin it by saying the dime, but maybe we can talk a little bit about it, because it also reminds me of, and it's not, the coalition is a little bit different, but with the coin in 12-step programs, how they mean so much to us, how they've changed our lives. And watching that video the way I did several times, that
you watched it several times?
Several times.
God bless you. Most people don't have the stomach to watch it once.
Yeah. Well, I found it riveting. I found it sad. It broke my heart, but then, it also gave me hope and happiness. And looking at you and knowing you today is you would have never, ever believed you went through what you went through.
And I think that is part of, I dated someone who was, in my opinion, an alcoholic. So through him, I went through AA because I wanted to take him to AA. So I'd go there and he'd be like, I'm not like them. I don't have problems as bad as them. So one day he'd say he was an alcoholic. The next day he'd say, of course he's not. Why was I crazy? Anyway, I had dated him. So I became very familiar with the steps. And actually, when I had gotten the brain scan, which is also in that video, we went to the psychiatrist who interpreted the brain scan, and she had met him too. She told me, you need to go to Al-Anon. And I said, I don't have a drinking problem. He has a drinking problem. I'm not the one with the problem. He should go. And then she said, you're dating him. You need to go. And light bulb went off. So I went to tons of Al-Anon, like 90. I got the books. I got workbooks. I got AA workbooks. Even though I didn't have an alcohol issue, I still used the recovery workbooks because I had my own issues. And actually, those workbooks were amazing. There's a 12-step workbook that I have that you sell, that I bought from you. I use that with my coaching clients who do not have alcohol issues. But anytime they say I'm powerless over blank, I'm like, dun, 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 there's the workbook. So I love that workbook. It's amazing. I'll include a screenshot of it so you can post it when you create this video. But I've bought multiple copies of that, and I've done it for myself and for other people, and it was extremely powerful. So thank you for selling that book, and a little shout out to you for anyone who wants any recovery books or tapes or coins, as you mentioned. Please go to Jay's store. The way I met Jay was at his store. I used to live a few blocks away. So he has beautiful stuff and mugs with quotes on them. I bought those. So okay. People love your store, but most people don't even know it exists.
Right. Well, I thank you. I thank you for that pun for us. And
go to choicesbookstore.com and buy the book that I bought, even if you don't have any sort of addiction issues. I swear to you, I think every time we're stuck, it's an addictive thought pattern to being a victim or being not good enough or feeling like an imposter. That, to me, if you're feeling that over and over again, is an addiction. It's a psychological addiction. So the 12 steps actually do work for that because I've used them on myself and I've used them with clients. So again, please go and buy that workbook. I hope you sell out that workbook.
I love that because, for me too, I spent some time in program as well. And what I discovered is the program can work for absolutely any. It's just a way of life. It's just a wonderful way of life. And then I found this book and I loved it, and I sold a ton of them. It's called 12 Steps for Anyone Who Wants Them. So you don't need to be an alcoholic, a drug addict. Just if you want to live that type of lifestyle, we have books that just, show you how to do that. All right.
last week. She had left a partner who was not good to her. There was deception and lack of loyalty and lack of truth and everything. And she's like, I can't believe I'm still dealing with this. Why can't I just shrug him off? And she felt emotionally so like attached to him, but she was so disgusted by his vile behavior. So I actually pulled out the book and I said, wait, you're powerless over this relationship. Let's just do the steps. And it's great because it makes a person feel like there's a solution for them, that especially if they don't have money for therapy or a life coach, like literally that book, that workbook, I think is like $24.95 or something. You can get that and do that on your own. So for all your listeners who say you don't have enough money to get help, for the love of God, buy that book. It was called The 12 Steps A Way Out.
Yes,
So
I know it completely.
I love it.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And I do agree with you in everything you've said. I'm not in a 12-step program as we speak now, but I practice the principles of that program and I practice the steps every single day of my life. So I'm so grateful to the different programs out there.
Yes.
So, and you more or less answered this just now, which I love because that's how things work. But you answered. I was going to ask you about your 12 steps experience and whatnot. So I will move to the next question.
Al-Anon was so helpful for me. Remember, Al-Anon happened around my whole suicidal time. It was great to have a room to go to,
Yeah.
and just that 3 minutes that they give you to speak.
And
That 3 minutes was like so healing. I don't understand how 3 minutes could be that healing. Or sometimes if you're in a bigger room, you only got 2 minutes. That sharing and getting no crosstalk, which means nobody can give you feedback. You could just share your truth and no one's going to say anything to you. It was so liberating and so healing on so many levels. I did that for a long time. So shout out to the 12-step programs.
absolutely, shout out. As you mentioned, those 3 minutes you get, the healing that comes from that, from venting it all out and putting it in the world and then not having to worry. It's just amazing. And I think that's what we don't do enough of. We don't share with people. We don't talk to people. We isolate.
Talk, right? We're afraid of the feedback. We're afraid that someone's going to tell us we're wrong. We're afraid someone's going to minimize our feelings. We're going to be afraid that someone's going to say it didn't really happen that way. It wasn't such a big deal. Why are we bothered by it? We should get over it. It's almost like there is so much external stimuli coming in. You're better off just shutting up. But then all that stuff keeps festering in you and you just feel like crazier and crazier over time. And then you can't make the best decisions. And with a lot of my clients, I help them multiply their income by addressing these mental and emotional blocks, basically these traumas that they've never addressed. So it's self-confidence after trauma. The only way you can have that is to speak your truth. So speaking it, even for 3 minutes, is so healing. If it's your total truth for 3 minutes, very powerful.
Absolutely. So this next question, once again, I don't want to do the spoiler alerts, so I will ask you the question and you'll say either let's save it or move on. So
Okay,
my next, your mom's reaction to your suicide, which you mentioned a little while ago, to me was shocking. How did you process it? How did you forgive her? Did you forgive her, and how and why?
So when we had that 5.5 hour session, so let's just do the spoiler alert if people don't see the video. When I was suicidal, I went to my mom and I told her explicitly, I said, I am going to kill myself. Will you take care of my cats? And she said, no. And we never talked about it again. And then I went to my grandmother and I said, I am going to kill myself. Will you take care of my cats? And she said, no. We didn't talk about it again. And then I went to my neighbor and I said, I'm going to kill myself. Will you take care of the cats? And she said, yes. And my neighbor and I actually had keys to each other's apartments. We'd been sharing a wall for many, many years. And she'd taken care of my pets before. So at least I felt the cats were going to be okay. But I was so baffled that my mom didn't say, well, do you want to talk about it? Should we go to a therapist? Should we call the police? Like, what the fuck's wrong with you? What do you mean? What are you talking about? Like, there was zero conversation about it. To this day, we've never talked about it. But again, in that 5.5 hour thing with the social worker, and I told the social worker, I said, we're going to both drive you nuts, because she was ping-ponging between me and my mom, going at each other. And we were crying. And this poor woman, God bless her, I realized that's her coping mechanism. And it's interesting. It was hard for me to feel trust for her again. Very, very hard, especially as I said, she was sending me all these love emojis and it was just overwhelming me and feeling weird. And then like slowly and slowly we started to get closer to each other and have a mutual understanding and respect. And I understood that I couldn't demand her to process trauma in the way that I did. My father had beaten her for 15 years. He had routinely raped her. He would routinely tell us in front of us that he was going to murder her, and strangle her, and his strangled paw marks would be on her neck. So I'm like, this woman was so terrorized for 15 years. My mom is actually very kind and thoughtful and considerate and nurturing and giving. She just can't talk about these couple of categories. So I was able to integrate that together. And since then, but it took a while, it wasn't overnight. She's my number one advocate now. I have had a lot of medical issues and I had other medical goals. She went to a lot of appointments with me. When my other cat died, she was with me there when we went to euthanize the cat. So then we went to adopt another cat, because the cats are like my source of life, because I've had so much trauma from humans that I rely on these animals for unconditional love. And I know that I do. And they're my actual emotional support animal for real. So she's been so loving and so kind and so nurturing. And there was a moment, Jay, I remember I was on a coaching call with a client, and she asked about forgiveness of her mother. So she said, and her mother had done horrible things to her. She said, Vivace, how do I forgive her? And I said, I'm not qualified to give you that answer, because I don't understand the word forgiveness. And I haven't done that in my life. So I cannot help you with that. And she said, I really appreciate you being honest. I'm like, I will help you with everything else. This one word, I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't understand how it's possible. So the forgiveness came from grace. And again, she's extremely loving and very generous and very kind. It's
Today.
just, yes, it's just, it was very mind fucking on all those other things. And also, like, she had an awakening. She would defend her family members. She would defend and protect people over absurd things that would drive me bananas. And I was like, wait, how are you defending this behavior? And then we'd get into a fight. And I think over time, she started to understand that she had been covering up for so many people, and she had been deluding herself. So she had her own come to Jesus / we're Jewish Moses moment, where she saw reality for what it was, and she stopped gaslighting herself.
Yeah.
So by her not gaslighting herself, we were able to be available to each other and have a much more open relationship. And probably, I think she makes much more mental and emotional concessions with me now than I do with her, because I think she's afraid of losing me, because that already happened multiple times. Yeah. So I'm very appreciative that where she can, she's making 1,000% effort. And with a couple of categories, there's going to be no conversation.
Perfect. It sounds like during those 5.5 hours, a lot of healing did take place. And I also feel
it didn't feel like it while we're both like wailing. It didn't feel like it at all.
You are today, so apparently it worked. And the only other thing I'd like to mention is, with some people, their trauma comes out in so many ways. And what it sounds like to me is hers might have been a little bit in denial, like not recognizing.
Coping mechanism, right? Or to minimize.
To minimize or deny.
Yep.
All right, cool.